The human mind feels private, a sealed room, a place where thoughts are born, tested, and dismissed in silence. But history suggests otherwise. During the 20th century, powerful institutions began asking a question that had nothing to do with therapy, healing, or understanding. They wanted leverage. They wanted predictability. They wanted control. What happens if fear can be implanted? If memory can be weakened? If belief can be nudged, fractured, or replaced? These were not philosophical exercises. They were funded projects, authorized programs, quiet experiments carried out far from public oversight, in hospitals, universities, prisons, and rented apartments with the blinds drawn. Some subjects volunteered, many did not. Most were never told what was being done to them. Officially, these programs were about national security, about staying ahead of enemies who were rumored to possess the same capabilities. Unofficially, they crossed boundaries that modern ethics would struggle to describe, let alone defend. Records were classified, names were erased, files were destroyed. Yet the effects did not disappear. They linger in public distrust, in cultural paranoia, in the uneasy feeling that influence often arrives disguised as protection. This is not a story about science gone wrong. It is a story about power discovering the mind is not a closed room. And once that door was opened, it never fully closed again. The world in 1950 had just begun to exhale from the shadow of global war, but a new, invisible enemy was already taking form. It had no uniform, no army, and no borders. It was ideology, communism. And in Washington, a quiet panic took hold. Policymakers, military strategists, and intelligence operatives shared a common worry. If the mind could be infiltrated, the nation could be destabilized from within. The Soviets were rumored to be developing techniques that could bend loyalty, fracture identity, and erase willpower. In response, the United States asked a question that would haunt ethics for decades. Could we do the same? Could a mind be broken, remade, controlled? Fear became the currency of policy. Paranoia fueled research budgets, and the CIA began funding studies at universities and hospitals, often under the guise of psychiatric treatment. Promising young scientists were offered the chance to explore the frontiers of human consciousness, methods that would have been unthinkable in peacetime. The focus was simple yet terrifying. Discover the boundaries of compliance. Map the mechanics of obedience. Find ways to implant ideas without consent, to erase memories without leaving scars, to transform a person into a tool for power. The experiments were classified, the subjects mostly unaware, and the results, in many cases, horrifying. History remembers the political speeches, the treaties, the generals, but the true battlefield of the Cold War was quiet, internal, and invisible. And it began here, with the first inkling that fear could be weaponized against the mind itself. Deep in the corridors of Washington bureaucracy, a program was born, with a name designed to conceal more than it revealed: MK Ultra. To most, it was meaningless letters stamped on files. To those in the know, it was a license to explore the human mind, as if it were a laboratory rat. The CIA poured money into experiments that blurred the line between science and cruelty. LSD, mescaline, and other hallucinogens became tools to fracture thought. Hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological coercion were carefully cataloged, tested, and refined. Volunteers? Sometimes. Unwitting citizens, prisoners, and patients? More often than not. In the shadows, the ethical framework of society was quietly dismantled. Researchers documented people slipping into alternate realities. Some emerged compliant, others broken. Memory could be teased apart, beliefs nudged, fears amplified. Every experiment, every dosage, every note in a secret ledger carried a chilling question. How far could the human mind be bent before it snapped or surrendered? MK Ultra was more than a project. It was a mirror held to the nation's anxieties. It revealed a country obsessed with control, terrified of external and internal enemies alike. The work was hidden, funded by taxpayers, and defended as a necessity. Yet the very methods designed to protect freedom undermined it at the most intimate level, inside the mind of an individual. And in that quiet, controlled chaos, a truth emerged. No one is ever truly immune to manipulation, and the mind is a terrain easier to map than it is to defend. Chemicals were only the beginning. The human mind could be teased, fractured, and guided in ways no drug alone could achieve. Hypnosis became a tool of fascination. Under careful observation, subjects could be led to forget, to obey, even to commit acts they would never have considered in full consciousness. Memory itself became malleable, a substance to be molded, stretched, and in some cases, erased. Sensory deprivation tanks isolated subjects from the world. Hours stretched into an eternity of darkness and silence. Thoughts turned inward, fears amplified. In some cases, subjects reported seeing visions, hearing voices, slipping into alternate versions of themselves. Every experiment was a mirror reflecting the fragility of identity. Journals from the era read like fevered science fiction. Subject believed he had ceased to exist. Control achieved through fear and repetition. Memory reconstructed. And yet these were not fictional accounts. They were meticulously recorded observations funded by the U.S. government. The experiments weren't limited to laboratories. Safe houses, prisons, and psychiatric wards became testing grounds. Observers watched, often through one-way mirrors, taking notes as the mind bent under pressure. The line between medical research and psychological torture blurred, dissolving entirely in some cases. MK-Ultra and its associated studies revealed a terrifying truth. Obedience could be manufactured, identity could be manipulated, and in the right hands, the mind was not a sanctuary, it was a battlefield. In San Francisco and New York, the CIA ran what they called safe houses, but the name is a misdirection. These were laboratories disguised as apartments, furnished with the ordinary trappings of daily life. Behind two-way mirrors, scientists and agents watched as unsuspecting men and women entered, drinks in hand, unaware of what awaited them. The cocktails were laced with LSD and other mind-altering substances. Subjects laughed, cried, stumbled into confusion, or revealed fears they didn't know they had. Every reaction was recorded, analyzed, cataloged. Every twitch, every hesitation, every word spoken under the influence became data, raw, intimate, and terrifying. The ostensible aim was simple: understand how chemicals and environmental pressures could alter behavior. But the reality was darker. In these mirrored rooms, humans were reduced to experiments, their autonomy stripped without consent. Some were brief amusements, others suffered long-lasting psychological effects. A few vanished from official records entirely. Operation Midnight Climax was more than a test of substances or technique. It was a demonstration of control, the power to manipulate perception, to bend social interaction, to reconstruct reality itself. It became clear that the mind was both fragile and astonishingly resilient, and that the most sinister experiments often carried the veneer of normalcy. The House of Mirrors stood as a testament to the era's obsession. If you could bend the mind quietly, invisibly, you could shape the future itself. By the 1970s, whispers that had haunted corridors of power could no longer be contained. Investigative journalists and congressional committees began pulling at threads that intelligence agencies hoped would remain hidden. The Church Committee, tasked with uncovering abuses by the CIA, stumbled into a labyrinth of secrets. Files labeled top secret were incomplete, shredded, or vanished entirely, leaving only fragments of a truth too large to ignore. Testimonies emerged of experiments conducted on unwitting citizens, prisoners, hospital patients, even ordinary Americans invited into what seemed like harmless studies. The reports painted a portrait of audacity and moral recklessness. Minds probed with drugs, coerced through hypnosis, isolated in sensory deprivation, and watched through mirrors, all in the name of national security. The public was shocked, yet many details remained elusive. The destruction of records meant countless stories could never be told. Names were erased, lives altered, histories rewritten in silence. What was revealed was enough to rattle trust, but insufficient to satisfy it. The true scope of MK-Ultra and its affiliated programs remained a shadowy puzzle. The revelation was not just about unethical experiments. It was a reflection of the era's fears, obsessions, and willingness to compromise individual autonomy for perceived national safety. A lesson emerged. When power is exercised in secrecy, accountability can vanish as easily as a shred of paper in a shredder. And in the quiet aftermath, Americans were left to wonder. If the mind could be so secretly manipulated once, could it happen again? In new forms? In new eras? Unseen, but no less real? Even after the programs were officially shuttered, their echoes persisted. MKUltra did not vanish when files were shredded or hearings adjourned. It lingered in public skepticism, in a growing mistrust of institutions, and in the stories people told each other in hushed tones. The experiments revealed a disquieting truth. The mind is fragile, and the illusion of autonomy is delicate. Pop culture absorbed the anxiety. Movies, novels, and music began exploring themes of manipulation, lost identity, and the invisible forces that shape behavior. The image of the controlled citizen, the brainwashed subject, became a recurring motif, a reflection of a society grappling with its own vulnerabilities. These weren't merely stories, they were collective attempts to process the ethical breach that had occurred in real life. The government's betrayal of trust seeded questions that remain urgent today. How much of our behavior is influenced by unseen forces? How willingly do we surrender autonomy to authority or technology? MKUltra may have been decades ago, but it cast a long shadow, teaching Americans to question the structures around them. Its legacy is subtle yet pervasive. The fear of control became ingrained in civic consciousness. Debates about ethics, consent, and the power of suggestion intensified. And in an age of media, advertising, and algorithms, the lessons of MKUltra resonate louder than ever. Influence can be invisible, manipulation can be systematic, and the mind remains a terrain constantly under siege. The battlefield for influence has changed. It no longer exists behind locked doors or mirrored apartments. Today, it is everywhere and nowhere. Algorithms track what we see, hear, and feel, curating streams of information tailored to our deepest fears, desires, and biases. Social media platforms, targeted advertising, and predictive analytics shape behavior on a scale that the architects of MKUltra could only imagine in fevered notes. The same principles apply: nudging thought, shaping belief, exploiting vulnerability. But now, the tools are data, code, and constant connectivity. The stakes are higher because the subjects are billions rather than dozens, and consent is murky, buried in terms of service agreements no one reads. Our attention, our preferences, our very perception of reality can be subtly guided, often without awareness. History provides context. What was once hidden, sensational, and isolated has become systemic, normalized, and largely invisible. MKUltra demonstrated that the mind could be mapped, influenced, and sometimes broken. Modern digital influence demonstrates that the mind can be steered, curated, and monetized. The lesson is stark. Influence is inevitable. Control can be subtle or overt. Awareness may be the only defense. And as our world grows more connected, the frontier of the mind remains as contested as ever, a silent battleground where power, persuasion, and perception intersect in ways both familiar and profoundly new. The mind is both a sanctuary and a battlefield. The story of secret brainwashing programs in America is not merely a tale of chemicals, hypnosis, or covert experiments. It is a warning. It is a reminder that when power extends into the intimate architecture of thought, consent can vanish, and the boundaries of morality can be rewritten without notice. MKUltra and its shadowed siblings revealed what many had feared but few understood. The human psyche is malleable, vulnerable, and endlessly fascinating to those who seek control. Even decades later, the consequences ripple outward, shaping how we think about authority, influence, and the ethics of experimentation. Today, the battle is quieter, but no less real. Algorithms, data, and constant connectivity are the new tools for shaping thought. The lesson of the past persists. Influence can be invisible, manipulation can be systematic, and the mind is never fully its own. We cannot undo history, but we can recognize it. We can question who holds power, what they seek to control, and how willingly we surrender our own perception of reality. The experiments may be classified, the records shredded, and the participants silenced, but their echoes endure in every corner of culture, politics, and the digital age. The mind is complex, its neutrality is fragile, and once it has been touched by power, there is no turning back.